world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
You are tuned in to the Foul Weather Podcast, the forecast to your next successful hunt. Coming to you from the home office, Jacks Reef, New York.
All right, folks, another great guest this week. We are joined by Dr. Scott Stevens from the Black Hills region of southwestern South Dakota, where he lives and works with Ducks Unlimited as the Senior Director of Conservation Strategies. Welcome to the Foul Weather Podcast, Scott, and I'd say more specifically to the Foul Weather Podcast from, it looked windy and chilly in South Dakota. It looks like you're in the midst of like a cold shot and some north winds right now.
Yeah, we are. I think it was 9 degrees Fahrenheit when I took the dog out this morning. So yeah, it feels like winter today, although that's been the anomaly over the past several months. So
yeah, and we'll get into it a little bit. About, you just sent me the snow water equivalency for the Canadian provinces, which will be an interesting one. It looked like a little better than what I thought it was going to be in some places, or at least improved, but it really hasn't been super cold in the western part of the country this year, right? In general.
Yeah, that's right. And I know what I've seen is, snowpack across, especially western mountains, is well below normal, like all across the West. That continues, into the prairies. Also, at least I think North Dakota got some snow, not last night, but the night before. Mm-hmm. But prior to that, when I looked at snowpack maps for the two Dakotas, it's like it was just very northeastern North Dakota that had any snow left. But there is some snow now in the Canadian prairies, which is good. Mm-hmm. We can talk about details. I know when I was up there in the fall, soil moisture was not great going into freeze up, so that presents a challenge. But yeah, having some snow is better than having it all be open, which is really where we were in the Dakotas recently.
Yeah, I keep thinking there's going to be like this 1-2 punch of like some blizzard stuff coming for, the kind of U.S. prairies and then the western kind of Canadian prairie provinces. That kind of southern portion of those provinces are really dry right now. North Dakota mostly. There's a little bit of snow in the north and northeast, but then South Dakota is like really, really dry and has been relatively warm. I don't know if it's going to happen, but like the La Nina is keeping us a little bit, at least in Canada, but it just seems like there's too much warm stuff that just keeps pushing up our way in general. So yeah. But was that your duck season too? Like you traveled a little bit to shoot. You must have had birds well into season. Especially, I think you did some early hunting in Canada, but I know you did some Pacific Northwest stuff too. So what was your season like in general, Scott?
Yeah, I spent the early part in Canada, which a traditional thing for me to do is go up and spend the early part in Manitoba chasing blue-winged teal. I've done that during the time I lived up there and am still able to go back and do that. And that was probably the toughest blue-winged teal season. I think I killed 4 teal in a couple days of hunting. There were just not birds. Like, it had been dry. Production didn't seem to be great. We just could not find birds. So that was the start. That was, the first couple days of September. I had 3 trips to Saskatchewan that were very good, although it was dry. But where you found water, there were birds. But I would say, in contrast to when conditions are wetter up there, it was more sort of isolated pockets of birds that you had to work to find. And, then you could have good hunts, but it was not like there were birds everywhere across the landscape. So yeah, had some good hunts in Canada. Got back to South Dakota and, I'm in the western part of the state, isn't prime duck country, but I've found a few areas, and I found one just before Thanksgiving. I had to, it was public land, had to look at the map to make sure it's like, is this open? Because there are a bunch of ducks out there. There's nobody around, and concluded that, yes, that's an open area, and put in a kayak and paddled me and the dog out there and just kept, rolling birds and gotten a little opening in the marsh that rolled about 500. And then it's like, yep, that'll probably work. So, shot 5 greenheads in about 45 minutes and then had to wait a little bit to find a
Nice.
widgeon drake. And then, so good morning. And then managed to throw the canoe or the kayak on top of the truck, and we found 3 pheasants by about 2 p.m. So good day.
Can't
Yeah,
beat that, right?
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I know there's not a lot of water out there. I spent some time kicking around the Black Hills. We chatted about ahead of time, but it sounds like people shouldn't try to go out there and find much because
Right.
they might run into you, but and take your spots. But
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, that's the advantage. And, same thing for upland bird hunting. I've found good places to chase upland birds, but it's lower densities, in the West
hmm
River stuff, but you kind of have less competition. So usually I'll take that trade-off, not competing with a ton of people, but you have the birds to yourself.
Yeah, and it's just a beautiful part of the world. So one of these days I'll get back that way. But you've traveled, you lived and worked in Canada previously, and now you're kind of back stateside. You're from Iowa originally, sounds like. But just cliff notes
Yeah.
on your career. I know, some of
Yeah.
it started at Mississippi State, many moons ago. It's kind of one thing we have in common of both being there for a little bit. But
Right.
um,
Yeah. So yeah, I grew up in Iowa and, rural small town Iowa in the far southwest corner. My hometown was about 9 miles from the Missouri border. And I ended up getting an undergrad degree at Northwest Missouri State in Maryville, Missouri. Had the good fortune of, Missouri Department of Conservation hired, techs for summer things. And so got to do a bunch of work there. Ended up at Mississippi State for a master's degree, and then did some other tech work, and finally came to DU as an intern at national headquarters in 1996.
hmm,
So I've worked for DU the whole time since. So this is my working on completing my 30th year with Ducks Unlimited, which it's like, how did that happen? But started as an intern. They gave me the great opportunity. I was looking for a PhD opportunity at the time. They kind of said, hey, if you wanted to do something that tied and connected to our habitat work, maybe we could just keep you on staff while you did that. It's like, that was too good a deal to pass up.
yep.
So we were able to connect with our leadership in the Great Plains office at the time, identify some uncertainties around how landscape characteristics influence duck nesting success that would help guide their investment in easements and that sort of thing. And so PhD at Montana State, the field work was in North Dakota. And then, when I finished, came to North Dakota, served in sort of a research scientist capacity, then director of conservation planning. And then I picked up some responsibility for some of the programs in the migration states like Nebraska and Wyoming and Colorado while I was there. And then the opportunity came up to sort of provide leadership and help guide the conservation work with Ducks Unlimited Canada in the prairies. And I knew the importance of the Canadian prairies. It's like, yeah, that sounds like a great opportunity. And my wife was willing to pack up the family and move to a foreign country, so we could pursue that. And yeah, spent 13 years with Ducks Unlimited Canada. Most of that time had responsibility for working with the team across the prairies. Also picked up the team that works in the boreal forest with indigenous communities, and near the end, and then spent the last couple years in kind of a science and planning capacity before moving back here in a similar science planning. Still work with still a focus on sort of the most important breeding areas on the continent and the prairies on both sides of the border, the boreal, and now working with our Western region team on engaging more in Alaska. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the cliff notes for what
And
I've been up to.
Yeah, and there's probably like a lot of like little in between stuff that, led you organically to all those kind of different adventures as a duck biologist. I really love these stories for all of us, right? Everybody's
Yeah.
kind of got something different, but it's like if you're get up, you just do good work, you really try to, fight for duck habitat in the ducks and just keep chasing like the next best cool thing. I don't know. I tell my students all the time, I'm like, I wish I could go back in BU
Right.
again. I don't know if I want some of the work and some of the the
Right.
bumps and bruises that we went through to get where we're at, but I tell you, I wouldn't trade what I've done kind of for anything. But you really kind of led into, having worked on the Canada and the U.S. Side of the prairies here, a little bit of kind of want to get into the meat and potatoes, I think, of today's chat. And because I remember working in the prairies my younger years, driving back and forth across the border between North Dakota and Manitoba.
Yeah.
And I think this was like the time of really intense CRP, of putting grass back on the U.S. prairies stateside. And it seemed like there was this really stark difference, with everything looking really brown and plowed in Canada and less so in the States. Still not great, but less so of that like brown kind of moonscape landscape in the United States. I don't know. It just seemed like there was a lot more grass in the U.S. than Canada in the late 90s. Is my recollection kind of correct about that? And kind of how have Canada and U.S. prairie conservation tracked next to each other, I guess, or differently through time?
Yeah. Well, I would say, first off, maybe some context. It's about 2/3 of the geography is on the Canadian side, and then 1/3 on the U.S. side. But sort of proportionally, I would say the U.S. has more grassland left, of the area that they have. And you're right, during the, early 90s, there was lots of restoration work on CRP in the U.S. There, one of the contrasts is there aren't big federal farm programs in the Canadian prairies, just because of the population of the country, and the tax base doesn't really support as lucrative support of farm bill programs as we have in the U.S. So there's always been that difference. But I think the commonality is markets impact what producers do in a similar way, right? So,
Gotcha.
One example I would give is, when you think about, we got renewable fuel standards in the U.S., which drove demand for corn to create ethanol. That created more demand for cropland. More acres went to corn, probably in the U.S. There's some in Canada now, but that increased demand for the other crops like wheat and canola and those kind of things. So, U.S. policy has impacts on markets and drives, pressures to convert and drain wetlands and those kind of things in Canada too. So yeah, it's been interesting working on both sides, seeing those things. There are definitely some things that translate that, maybe wouldn't be obvious to everyone, but it's there for sure.
Well, and that's why I thought you'd be the person to talk to, having kind of worked on both sides. And that's interesting. These are global markets for these commodities. And so it's,
right.
A change in one country is also driving, what goes on in the other lots of times. The other thing that keeps popping up is...
Yeah, absolutely.
Other thing that really keeps popping up, and I hopefully I didn't cut you off. If you had more to comment on there, obviously feel free.
No, all good.
Okay. There's this protection of kind of landowner rights that really keeps popping up. And I think that maybe it's because I think some folks feel like conservation's gone too far, removing land from tax rolls. I think I heard like North Dakota was no longer allowing the federal government to use duck stamp dollars to purchase any waterfowl production areas. I should know these things if they really happened. I also heard that somehow like conservation easements are under attack. So you got is there like some detail on the general challenges and pushback against conservation measures in the prairie, and kind of maybe like from your speculation or your interaction, like what are maybe the societal motivations for that pushback that you think of?
We all know that feeling. Every waterfowl hunter knows the feeling. You're motionless in the marsh at first light, watching birds work the spread, hoping this season is as good as the last, hoping that the future has birds working the spread for generations to come. At the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, the mission is simple: to guarantee all Americans quality places to hunt and fish. For waterfowl hunters, that means safeguarding habitat and migration corridors and creating more places to hunt, so strong fall flights and good hunting opportunities aren't a thing of the past. As the nation's largest coalition of conservation groups, TRCP brings together hunters, anglers, and conservation partners to make sure the future of waterfowl hunting stays strong. Learn more today and join the TRCP by visiting trcp.org.
Yeah, that is definitely out there. And maybe the context I'd provide is, a big focus of the conservation programs for DU in the U.S. prairies and in the Canadian prairies is purchase of perpetual conservation easements. And maybe the best way to describe those, the way they've been described to me, and I think makes it easier to think about, when you're a landowner, it's like having a bundle of sticks is all the rights that come with owning the land. And really with the easements, the landowners are selling, in the case of in Canada, it's Ducks Unlimited Canada that purchases the easement and has to monitor and enforce. And in the US, it's actually Fish and Wildlife Service. DU may fund some of those, but those are held and monitored by the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they actually become part of the National Wildlife Refuge System in the US. So, these easements are pretty simple in that the landowner sells the right to cultivate, the right to drain wetlands, and that's kind of it. So it's just really protecting the habitat features that are important for waterfowl. They still decide how much they graze, who has access, all of those things. But they sell a couple of those sticks out of the bundle of rights. So, like these have been going on the longest in the U.S. prairies, since the 50s. They started purchasing these easements. And, they're valued, well, now grassland easements are probably, the payment per acre is probably about half of the fair market value of the land. So for wetland acres, it's even higher. So, the producers get compensated. In Canada, it was more on the order of they might get a payment for 30 or 40% of the fair market value of their land.
Okay.
So, they receive sort of a financial payment. It's one time upfront for selling those rights. But then, there are perpetual restrictions that go with that. So, some of the challenges are like, let's say, a landowner in the Dakotas sold one of those in the 50s and, things change, or maybe the grandson has it now and he's like, well, I didn't get the payment. And it's like, well, but, somebody did. If you purchased the land, your lawyer should have helped you understand that it came with restrictions, and maybe you should have offered less. But I think it's sort of subsequent landowners who, have had complaints about those. And, then technology has changed, like in the Dakotas now with all the tile drainage, the easements still protect the wetlands, and they require some setbacks from the wetland to make sure the hydrology isn't impacted. So you can't put tile right up to the edge of the wetland and starve the wetland. Right. Those hydrologic impacts are protected by the easements. And that's caused some consternation. My counter would be, well, these are all voluntary conservation programs that no one has to enter. They choose to enter. And, the interesting thing is in the Dakotas, we have, over 1,000 landowners standing in line waiting for an offer on those conservation easements.
Really?
So
That's
there's high demand still for it. So anytime we hear the pushback, it's like, well, if this is such a bad deal, how come so many people are interested? So
is a lot of it like there's, we consider these places that stay wet and or ephemeral at times as marginal land for production. So that's a lot of they're trying
right.
like they've lived there for maybe their second generation or whatever, and it's always been wet and there's nothing they can do about it.
Right.
And so but I tell you when corn per bushel goes really high, all of a sudden somebody can buy new fancy rock pickers and equipment, and the things we thought that weren't possible to turn into corn growing or, soybean or wheat belts are increasingly being transitioned to that. So, I mean, there's still need to kind of conserve that land for some period of time. But that's my guess is why people are lining up, is they just have spots that are just underproducing or cost benefit ratios just aren't there. Is that a lot of it, or is it folks just getting out of farming altogether, do you think?
No, most of the demand, Mike, would be from ranchers who look at these easements. And, I've heard this story told that, the rancher came in and he's like, okay, so, I can't cultivate, but all I'm doing is grazing cows. So you're telling me that I can continue to do the same thing that my dad did and my grandfather did, only you give me a payment for this? And the answer is yes, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So for them, it's compatible with what they want, the land use that they want to do anyway. So, you know, some people might say, well, you know, is that at risk? And it's like, yes, exactly what you described, because
Mm-hmm.
if it changes hands, you know, then somebody has a different view and is like, nope, I would like to cultivate that. So that's why we do the protection. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we see lots of grassland conversion. You know, we see declining amounts of grassland. So it's like existing grassland with it, wetlands embedded in it is one of the best conservation bargains that we have out there. And you make a one-time payment and you protect it forever, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of our listeners know it, but I think it's worth saying again is that grasslands worldwide are one of the most endangered habitats on the planet. So, I mean, let's just even go beyond ducks, right? There's other critters
Right.
that need grasslands, and it is an absolutely endangered ecosystem out there. So, kudos on that. The the duck stamp stuff in North Dakota, like that federal government
Yeah.
buying land. Is that a thing? I don't like
It is
I
a
should do
thing.
my research before I interview people, but I'm like, I'm just gonna put this on the script and let Scott help me on this one.
Yeah, it is a thing in North
Okay.
Dakota because, you know, because it was a focus in those early years in the 50s for some of these conservation easements and WPA acquisition. North Dakota has always had what I would call kind of an anti-conservation stance. So they had rules that, you know, that required governor approval for, you know, like nonprofits buying land and those kind of things. And with the with with the conservation easements and those purchases, there are restrictions on the pots of money that you can use. So migratory bird stamp money in North Dakota cannot be used for the purchase of those easements and those kind of things.
Okay.
There are also caps for counties on how many easements can be purchased with migratory bird funds or those kind of things also. So, you know, there are interesting and nuanced restrictions in North Dakota. Now, there are other pots of money that like DU can help bring to the table, like NACA funds that don't come with those restrictions. Private dollars that we bring to the table, you know, like the big Cox gift that recently came
Yep.
to invest in the prairies, those come without those restrictions. So, you know, it's kind of a nuanced playing field, but we work to bring the right dollars to get the right habitat protected in the places that are most important for the ducks.
And one point there, just so listeners are aware, NACA is North American Wetlands Conservation Act funds, federal
Yes.
funds, but it's not like one of these like government takeovers where big government comes in and just buys land. It has to be matched. I could put quotes around local dollars, but it has to be matched with kind of grassroots dollars. So it's not. There has to be some buy-in for the
Yeah.
conservation itself. It's not like big government running around gobbling land up, is a way I try to teach it to my students usually. So.
Yeah, that's right. Requires, you know, the technical terms are U.S. non-federal match. So it
Yeah.
could be state dollars. We bring a lot of private dollars to the table to provide that match. And essentially, you know, if you bring a dollar of private money to the table, you can access a dollar of federal North American Wetlands Conservation Act funds. So, you know, it's really in the bucket of this kind of public-private partnership and, you know, leveraging private dollars for those investments. And all of the programs are, once again, voluntary. You know, landowners choose to sign up. You know, there's no eminent domain or anything like that
Right.
going on.
Right.
Maybe the other key point I would make, you know, especially for these easements in the Dakotas is, you know, since the 50s in both of the Dakotas, you know, there's been investment of duck stamp dollars that duck hunters all across the country have been purchasing into easements and acquisitions. And like I said, there are strings and caps on some of those things. But, you know, the way I think about it is, you know, that's sort of like, you know, that's an asset that duck hunters have invested in, you know, for a long time. And, you know, I think you could liken it to, you know, it's sort of like a duck production 401k, right? Duck hunters have purchased these assets, you know, they're perpetual agreements or owned land. They continue to produce a return annually when the habitat conditions are right and the birds are there. So there have been challenges and suggestions that, well, maybe we change some of those restrictions or make them only 20-year easements. And, as a duck hunter, it's like, well, I paid for that asset already, and having
Right.
somebody say, we're going to withdraw out of your 401k funds is not something that duck hunters should be very excited about. So, I would say pay attention. There are discussions about those assets that we've all helped pay for, and we may need duck hunters to make noise and write their representative at the right time if we get some of those challenges that come to fruition and we need to deal with.
Yeah, that's a great point. I really like how you laid that out. It's like the duck 401k. And this is kind of why the push to move from 30-year easements to perpetuals just makes sense from an investment standpoint, because you invest one time in your ducks, and then you're going to get constant return, as you said, when the conditions are right, and those obviously fluctuate, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's, I think, what is kind of on everybody's mind, and we kind of talked about it a little bit, but what the prairies are looking like. Are we going to be back to another flyover year where the boreal has to save us, or maybe play a little more into, or dig a little more into the kind of discussion we started there at the beginning of what stuff looks like.
Yeah, and maybe I'll start with some context again, Mike. I mean, you're familiar with this literature too, but it's been right in front of me as we've, I mentioned to you before we started, DU is kind of going back and reviewing all the science and updating our international conservation plan. And we always start with, what's the latest science on population dynamics? Tell us about what's driving duck populations. And when we look at that literature, there are a bunch of guys in our field that are smarter than me anyway on, developing those models, and they can help us ask questions like, okay, when we make a change in these different vital rates, like nesting success or annual survival rate, which of those have the most impact on whether populations go up and down? And really, to boil it down, it's breeding season events for the most part, for, I would say for upland nesting dabbling ducks that really drive populations, so DU has taken that and said, well, our investments in prairie breeding areas in places like the boreal and places like Alaska, those will have the most impact on populations. So we've prioritized those. But as we talked about, things have been drier in the prairies, and I know we've got some stats on like May ponds that we'll play some games with later. But I was looking at where we were this past year. It's the lowest May pond count in the prairies that we've had since 2004, I think.
Wow.
So
yeah.
So things are dry. I know after the surveys were out this past year, I looked back at the percent change from the peak populations, which for total ducks and many of the species, it was kind of around, 2013 through 15 or so.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
about,
that sounds right. Yep.
just about a decade ago. And for many species, we're at about half of the numbers that we had at that peak. So, all these discussions lately about, hey, we're seeing fewer ducks. It's like, yep, our surveys tell us that, from a peak you saw a decade ago, we're at about half. So, but yes, all driven by, those habitat conditions on key breeding areas like the prairies. And, we had been pretty warm, pretty dry. It's been dry for a number of years. There is a little snow in Canada, which could improve things a bit. But I always tell people, it's like, the conditions that I've seen when we really see a big switch in habitat conditions in the prairies is if I'm up there in the fall, it's like so wet that farmers can't get in to do the harvest. Like that's a really good sign, because then you've got really good soil moisture. And then when it freezes, any snow that you get is likely to run off the landscape and into the wetlands. When I was up there this past fall, soil moisture, it was dusty and dry.
Yeah.
So when you go into freeze up like that, even if you've got some snow laying on the ground, when the melt comes, most of it just soaks in kind of like a sponge. So, we've got some snow in Canada, not much in the Dakotas right now. So could we see a little improvement in conditions? Maybe. Like I probably won't bet against a small increase in ponds, but it's not the kind of conditions that's going to flip us back into a wet, really wet period up there. So, we would expect in those conditions, depending on the species, where habitat conditions are good in the prairies, you will find birds trying to breed. Some species will overfly, and we talk about the boreal being a relief valve. We know some birds breed there. Probably breeding probability when they have to overfly is lower than when conditions are good in the prairies. So, yeah, I would say, right now, if I had to speculate, is it going to get worse? Probably not. Is it going to get dramatically better? Probably not either.
Yeah, and I'm in the same boat. I mean, that there's this real classic La Nina signal going on of where the snow is across kind of that Canadian prairie and into the Great Lakes, but it's like that snow line's a little higher than what I want it to be. And as you said, if it's dry, when it does melt, the soil's just going to eat it. It doesn't run off. It doesn't puddle how it needs to. And so, Manitoba honestly looks kind of good relative to other places. You get over Saskatchewan, Alberta, the snow line's further north. There's less of it. As you said, it was relatively dry. Like I think the Parklands might be in a really good place this year. That's kind of where I'm at,
Yeah. Those maps that I sent you that you can include, in links or share when this gets posted. Yeah, that was my take. It's like the most recent one. It's like, oh yeah, we've got some snow across the Parklands, which tend to be more stable water. But we know, from past experience that when things are really cranking in the prairies, we also have that southern, more grassland areas wet. And that's when things really kind of pop and ducks do well.
Well, and this goes back, and you might remember this. This wasn't on the script. I just thought of it, though, like that U.S.-Canada kind of split. There was a year that the U.S. prairies produced more ducks than the Canadian prairies, and it was like the first time that happened. And I don't remember when that was, but I don't think we've seen that for a while. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think we've seen that for a while. And we're not going to see it this year, I don't think, unless something drastically changes in a very short period of time, I think.
Yeah, well, we've got some maps that sort of show where the water and where the bird density is across both sides, through time, the whole time that we have surveys. And, the take home that I have is it's like, hey, the birds in the water really move around this whole geography. So, our strategy is we need to protect as much of the habitat across that geography because you never know exactly where those right environmental conditions are going to exist. And if you lose habitat and you have areas that just, no matter the environmental conditions, are not going to provide habitat and, provide that opportunity for birds, it's just like sort of, scratching off some of those areas from ever having production. So, that's why there's a focus on things like easements and keeping as much good habitat as we can on both sides of the border.
And I tell you, I was there in the late 90s, lived there in South Dakota for 8 months. I think I was there like the year before, maybe working for Delta. I can't remember what that job, there was like a period of time, but that was like when the Red River was flooding. And
yes,
I mean, that was like overwhelming amount of water on the landscape. And we had ducks coming out our ears. I went back to hunted kind of south central North Dakota not last season, the season before that. And it was starkly very, very different. Let's just say that as far as like there's that semi-permanent and permanent wetland, but there just wasn't that like real shallow stuff for the most part out there. We were hunting big, what a lot of us would consider lakes, right? These big permanent systems. So
yeah, well, and that's one thing that I've noticed of late. So we have pond counts, but most of those are what I would call more stable water, like semi-permanent wetlands. And we really see the boom in production from ducks when we have that ephemeral water, seasonals, ephemeral wetlands that are just getting wet. Those are, highly productive with invertebrates. The ducks go crazy and they kind of overwhelm the system. And, production is great for a few years when you first get wet. So
yeah, it'll come back.
It will eventually.
It will. I keep saying next year, but I don't think next year is going to be it. And this is way out, but there is a chance that we get an El Nino winter next year, which kind of nobody wants to hear about. Right. I think we might end up in, like, we froze out. My wife and I hunted one time in December on a thaw, but usually like December for us in those El Nino years is like a back and forth. And we get like lots of really cool flooding, snow events, and then melt events and all that. So I'm not
up here in central New York, it doesn't bother me.
Right.
But folks in the South, like if we get a fairly, production, maybe about the same as last year, and then we get a strong El Nino or something, it might be tough. But it's very, very early, so I don't want to be too doom and gloom. Ducks do exist, just to be
they do.
To be fair.
Yeah. They're out there.
Super informative stuff. Scott, super, super informative. I really like, just the fact-driven conversation we're having.
Sure.
And, really good to hear from somebody that's, on top of kind of the current conditions. So, but let's move on to something that keeps me up at night.
Okay, sure.
The social media outrage against DU. So,
yeah.
just the level of fake news that's spread out there is just insane, right? I've got some simple questions for you to address, which are kind of like tongue in cheek, but they're literally things that you see out on social media.
Yeah.
Our friend Forrest Carvajal from the Off the X podcast and Pond Creek Duck Calls, he likes to call social media the funny pages, which I thought was just a great way to describe it. And, he says, don't even look at them. Don't comment on them. And I kind of agree, right? I think the point is like, you should, as someone who is a duck hunter and is a waterfowl wetland scientist, I want to know what the general public is up to, what they're talking about. It, gives me some sense of the weird conspiracy stuff that's out there. But generally what I tell people is like, don't comment, let it fade into oblivion, right? Like that's the best medicine is like, don't fan the fuel of that fire. Cause you've seen it. It just gets deep in the weeds and too much back and forth in general. So
yeah, I do vacillate a bit, Mike. I would be honest. It's like, there are times that I'm like, just let it go. But, there are also times where I go, well, there may be, a proportion of people who are following that and not commenting who, might be open-minded to be educated. So there are times that, I will try and help with that education and, point things out that are true, not so much for the folks that are commenting, which probably aren't going to be convinced, but other folks that are following along and are maybe a little more thoughtful and open-minded. So I don't know. I try and convince myself of that sometimes.
I'm kind of the same way. And, with the podcast, we have to run a Facebook page. We have to run an Instagram page.
Right.
In general, it's just part of the business. So I'm stuck with, I have my personal page and then I have two others. Right. And then I've got the lab one for ESF. So, my social media is kind of a meltdown and I don't care for it that much. I probably spend more time on it than I need to. But we've just come up with a policy of responding to bizarre comments that are on our page once. Right. And then let it go. Right.
Yeah.
And then do things like this, this is our voice, bring it up on here. Yeah. And, right? People can find this and get the good information.
My friends across duck country, time to step up your calling with Beckman Game Calls. These beauties sound like a duck. Just have a listen. First, a live hen mallard, and then the Edison in the flooded timber of Arkansas. Beckman Game Calls now in new and coming colors and woods, including the Edison in the smoke color, a super sharp looking acrylic call, and wood offerings in African Blackwood and Cocobolo. The only adjustable cut-down call on the market. Check out Beckman Game Calls at beckmangamecalls.com and get your cut-down call today. How many days have you had empty skies over the duck blind? Cameras full of deer except when you're there. Turkeys that just won't turkey right. Your property can be more with Wildlife Strategies. It is no secret that hiring a consultant, an expert in managing water, woods, and fields, an expert in duck foods and deer and turkey habitat, an expert in hunting pressure management. Well, it is no secret that hiring a consultant yields better habitat for the critters you chase. Less empty skies, more quality days afield, more smiles for miles with family and friends. If that's your game and goal, contact Ryan Delaney at ryan@farmlg.com for a site visit. Let's go
Sure.
with a few simple questions I see. Has
Okay,
DU
sounds
ever
good.
has DU ever produced heated ponds up north with the intent of holding ducks up there?
Yeah, no, this is a crazy one, but no, I heard that a lot, especially when I was in Canada, but when I'm here in the Dakotas too, and it's like I would be happy to do a, January or February tour of, some of these areas because, a lot of times it's like 20 below zero, and I don't know what kind of infrastructure you'd have to keep water open. And, the reality is once you get really the first freeze, the birds are south of you anyway, and
Yeah.
they're not moving back to those latitudes until springtime. So no, none of that happens. The focus is on, protecting and enhancing breeding habitat on those breeding areas. And then, you got to take care of the birds the rest of the year, and they need food and they need to survive. And so we focus on habitat, on public and private land. It's like we need them both. But lots of investment in public land that are accessible to people. But, I would also say, I think we're getting good information. A bunch of the guys down south who have transmitters on birds now, like refuge areas are really important if you're going to hold birds, like you got to have food, but you got to manage pressure too. So, but no heated ponds.
So are you producing, the other one is DU produces duck refuges. Here's the key ingredient in this though, Scott, with the intent of holding ducks up north.
No, again, we're focused on the habitat and taking care of the birds all throughout their life cycle. And, on public land, most of the work we do is owned by someone else, owned by a state agency, owned by Fish and Wildlife Service. So they decide what is refuges and what isn't.
Mm-hmm.
On private land, we have lots of private clubs that feed ducks and take care of them too. I'd say the ones that do that well have some sanctuaries and some refuges, but no, it's not like there's any conspiracy to, hold ducks at a certain latitude.
Well, does that, I mean, I do this podcast and I feel horrible on years that I'm like, guys, it's just going to be warm. It's going to suck
Right.
if you live in this. Like, I don't want that. I want everybody to have their fair share. I want duck hunting to be alive as a culture across what I call Duck Country USA and Canada. I have to throw that in there too, obviously.
Yeah.
I want it to be alive and well everywhere. I don't think in any, and DU needs members and supporters, and duck hunters are that.
And we need people buying duck stamps and those kind of things.
So those ducks need to go south. The thing that's happened, I think a lot of folks don't recognize, though, is the percentage of wetland loss that has happened kind of at that mid-latitude region, especially in the Mississippi and Central Flyway. And a lot of folks, not just DU, but state organizations, federal refuges, private landowners, other nonprofits, are trying to put those acres of wetland back on that landscape that were once there. And couple that with warm weather. Can that hold birds north? Yeah. But you're just trying to replace a thing that's been lost. A pretty critical habitat for lots of animals, including ducks, is that wetland kind of at that mid latitude. So it's like there's no like ill intent here, because logically it just doesn't make any sense, right? Like Scott Stevens just hates people in Louisiana. Like, hates duck hunters in Louisiana. That's it. And that's why we do this thing. So
the timing is interesting too, Mike. Looking across the continent in important areas, like important wintering areas, some of the most important are, the Mississippi Alluvial Valley and the Gulf Coast, at least in the mid-continent, right?
Yep.
And the Gulf Coast has lots of challenges. So I know DU is investing, tens or 20s of millions of dollars on an annual basis to restore coastal marsh and to do work in those areas. So yeah, we can't afford to leave anyone behind. Like we need habitat all throughout the areas that birds spend during their whole annual life cycle. So yeah, we're working all across there. And, many of those areas, the best information we have, Mike, is that if we had goal level populations of ducks right now, if the prairies got wet again, we're probably in a deficit to provide the food resources and everything that those goal level populations would need. Wow. So, that's why we haven't said, okay, we've got enough. Most areas it's like, no, we still need more.
Yeah, when you look at the most recent, it's like the status and trends in wetlands of the contiguous U.S. So it doesn't include Alaska. It doesn't include Alaska. It's the U.S. wetland trends. Yeah. We're losing wetlands. Yeah. We still are, despite all the things we do and the value that we know we have. The value that we know wetlands have. We are still losing acres. We're
Yeah.
we had a gain for a little while, and it's kind of tipping the other way. So there's still need for that.
Yeah.
We had folks on here. We're going to have them back on again. Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership is working with DU a lot, kind of in that
Yeah.
lower Miss area, and trying to really help revitalize some of that coastal wetland in that region, and or for that matter, sustain it for the most part.
Yeah.
But there's been, that's the other thing too, is if folks go look at these maps of where projects have been placed by DU, there is a massive amount in Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, in that kind of core wintering area, because everybody knows, I mean, that's vitally important, especially on these cold winters,
Right.
when the birds really get pushed into those areas. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
all right, another good one. So I saw this thing about what your CEO makes. Somebody somehow FOIA'd, or it's probably all out there on your.
Yeah.
It's probably all publicly available because you're a nonprofit. So is DU
right.
a wasteful organization that has higher pay for administration? Basically, does your higher administration make too much money?
Yeah, good question. Well, I would point out, there's an IRS form that all nonprofits have to do. It's Form 990 that is available to everyone to look at. And yeah, you have to show the salaries of, the top 10 or so staff. But we also have to, and we report on sort of our efficiencies, how much money do we raise? How much of that goes into the mission, into delivering habitat and those things? And DU is always focused on making sure that ratio is, greater than 80% going into the mission. And, in recent years, it's been like 86%, or, I don't have the exact one from the most recent year in front of me.
So I spend $10 let's go with, I spend 100 at an event.
Yeah.
Not 10, but 100. 86 of that goes right into conservation delivery. Yeah.
Yeah. That kind of stuff. And, every year we produce an annual report that, I provided you a link to one of those. We can share that too.
Okay.
Like the past year, I have it here. The past year, which ended at the end of June for us, June 2025, total operating revenue, $420 million. So we've seen some significant growth even since COVID. $420 million on the expense side, 418. So, we were left with an operating surplus of about $2 million. Makes sense to not spend everything that you get, have a little cushion there. And, for the investment in conservation, total habitat conservation, investment of $308 million in U.S. habitat delivery, support for Canadian programs, Mexican programs, and then donated conservation easements. So, that is all available for folks to look at. I look at that because despite the fact that I'm employed by DU, I'm an investor too. I give them some of my own money, so I pay attention to those things too. And, as a guy who cares about ducks, if there was a better place that I could get a return on my investment for my money, I would take my money there. But, right now, given what I know, this is a darn good place.
Yeah, no, and that's really important. I think the federal reporting is out there because somebody did make that comment when that list, your list of your CEO and all that stuff went out.
Yeah.
And somebody was like, yeah, but 80% of dollars go directly back to habitat. And somebody's like, well, show me your proof for that. Like, well, you federally have to report these things, and you're not, an organization of your size and magnitude is not lying to the federal government about this stuff, right? So these are fact-driven kind of reports that you put out.
We have a whole board of directors who looks at that stuff too, right?
Independent, right? Basically independent. Yeah, you have to have, I think, legally a board of directors for this type of stuff.
Yeah.
And then the other thing too, I think folks don't understand, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I think maybe Nature Conservancy is the only other nonprofit conservation organization that's larger than DU. I think you're the second largest organization.
That's probably right, Mike.
It's right around there, right? So.
Yeah, the other thing that I'd comment, I know our HR group is doing this now, is going out and getting market surveys on, the pay rate for our staff relative to comparable people in the federal government, other nonprofits.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Because you want to, you want to be in market. You don't want to be paying too much. You don't want to be paying too little. But maybe I'll break out a football analogy here too. It's like, um, you know, it's like, do you want to, do you want our top leadership to be kind of the lowest third of the pool? It's like when I look at NFL teams, it's like I'm not sure people are going cheap on quarterbacks if they want outcomes.
Yeah,
Our two teams, the Bills and the Chiefs, it's like they didn't go cheap on quarterbacks because
right.
you want to win, right?
Yeah.
So
we'll bring that up later. By the way, I got a little. I'm going to needle you a little, I think, on that one.
Okay, sounds good.
It's fine. It's all in good fun. But that's kind of my comment too. Yeah, that's a good point. Is like you want reasonable folks at the top, and
all throughout.
Yes, but it's a big machine. I mean, you guys are a very large, and I'd say well-oiled machine in general. Obviously, there's bumps and bruises in any organization, but I mean, you guys just the single focus of habitat and keeping duck habitat on the ground and not wavering from that for all your years has really, served you well. But one other thing too is like, you look at that, heck, I don't know that I'd want your job for that matter. Like, it's just like, it takes a special person to want to be the CEO or really high administration in an organization like Ducks Unlimited. That is a massive amount of responsibility. Yeah. Massive numbers of hours, tons of travel, and you have to be compensated for that, right? So again, bottom line is the percentage that's going right back to the Ducks is really what's important. So
Yep, I think so too.
Thanks for setting the record straight there.
Right.
There's going to be a percentage of people that listen and is like, Scott Stevens lying to us. I'm like, well, fine.
Right.
But you can't win them all.
Yeah. Well, we'll let them look at 990s and annual reports, and it's like dig into the details and ask questions. We're happy to answer.
I'm sure they won't, but that's fine.
Right.
But let's, while we're at it, are we shooting too many ducks? Let's just go for that one real quick for fun.
Yeah. Well, and this is, Mike, where I go back to, there are folks smarter than me that study this, and I have lots of confidence in them. Folks with the Fish and Wildlife Service like Scott Boomer, and then we've got some of our colleagues, Mitch Wiegman, Dave Coons, that do a lot of analysis on this and publish papers. And, when I look at it, it's like the papers that I've read recently say, hunting matters. We wouldn't want to sort of say shoot ducks whenever you want, but within the constraints that we have for seasons and bag limits now, hunting is not much of a driver. We see that habitat conditions on breeding areas and reproductive success are really what's driving populations. And, maybe the best recent example is the change in harvest strategies for pintails. When I look at that, it's like, okay, if we were going to save pintails with restrictive regs, we've had that for like 30 years. That would have already happened, right? If harvest was the challenge with pintails, we would have seen recovery because we've had very restrictive regs. So, the population models suggest, we could have some more harvest without impacting populations. That, happened this year. I saw lots of people were very happy with 3 pintails on the strap in different places. And my bet, we'll monitor that and make sure that it's not having a negative impact. But my bet is we won't see much for changes in pintails, and that'll be just fine.
Yep.
Would I say that I'd be in favor of going back to, sort of point system 10-point pintails? It's like, I might get more nervous about that. But 3 pintails in the bag, I think, is probably going to be just fine.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Tap the banner or visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
Yeah, there's thresholds. We work very hard. As you said, we've got high quality scientists on this stuff that know way more than I do about this as well. And we have safety valves, right? Like the pintail thing is like a 3-year type deal. And, hopefully we also, we learn from it, right? Like we went to two black ducks from one, and we're not seeing any effect there either. And that's kind of the similar thing, is that those numbers were kind of steady. They weren't really recovering, and, harvest wasn't really the driver of that population anyway. So yeah, Good stuff. But what really irks me is when I have these conversations with folks that, to a large degree kind of work to help, learn some of the facts, and then kind of set the record straight with them. And they're like, oh, that makes sense. And then like a few weeks later, I'll see something on social media where they just turned around and are like, we need a 30-day season, and we need a 3-duck limit with 1 hen mallard, or we should just close the season for 2 years and the population will recover. And I'm like, you're killing me, man. Like, I know. There's some weird sociology that goes on there in like a coffee shop where like I have this conversation with somebody, and they're like, oh, I get it. And then they go to have the same conversation. And I think what goes on is there's like 5 other guys at the coffee table in the coffee shop that are like, just jump all over them. And there's just like too much peer pressure on it or something. I don't know. There's just like this rhetoric of fake news across duck country that just keeps boiling up. And I'm like, but the information's out there, man, and I gave it to you. So
yeah, I think at least on that one, I think everybody has good intentions. Right?
I appreciate that, definitely.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, they want the best for the birds and that kind of thing. And I think the other challenge for us is that the idea that every duck you shoot is one that doesn't fly back north is simple and intuitively appealing. And unfortunately, the reality from the real science on it tells us it's more complicated than that. And, many that you shoot would have died anyway, during the winter, or had, there's density dependence, in survival and in reproductive success that comes into play. But, those stories are far more complicated than the idea that, well, any that we shoot would have went back and the population would have grown. I would tell you, with conditions in the prairies right now, sending more ducks back, like, probably isn't going to have much of an impact given the conditions that we have now. So
yeah, there's only so many territories. There's only so much space.
That's right.
There's density dependence, but that's, I like that. I mean, it's because it's intuitive. The other, this is why some of our brightest folks are our population modelers, right? Like, this stuff is not linear. It's not a direct path from point A to point B. And so I get it. I think that's a really good way to think about it. The easy outs tend to be, what comes up the most. So yeah, I don't know. I want to be that person like that is very optimistic about us as duck hunters, and really want to be, positive about all this stuff in general. This is why we run the podcast, why I got, you on here. I mean, we're kind of in a little bit of like the InfoWars thing that we got to pump out, a little bit better factual info. And, it is boiling to the top. I'm seeing a lot more folks become really informed about harvest, habitat, all that stuff. It's the thing with the habitat. I think lots of times folks just don't feel like it's a lever they can pull and have like an immediate effect, right?
Right.
It's more like, hey, if I don't shoot these things, that's the lever I can pull right away. So I get that. Like, here's what's funny is, like, I'm guilty of this because when I go out, I know my hen mallard shooting probably doesn't matter.
That's right.
But I'm like, culturally in my head, I want to see a strap filled with greenheads, and that's what I take, right?
Yeah.
Now, am I super picky on bad days? If I shoot a hen, do I feel bad? Not really. But like, I'm not coming home with 2 hens on regular occasion. That ain't happening, right? Like, once I've got one by mistake, I'm probably going to come home with less than, for us, 4 mallards, than shoot another hen to fill the bag. Like, that's probably not going to happen. So I still, even knowing all the science, I'm still guilty of it, right? So.
Yeah, well, I tell people I do the same thing. I play those games where it's like, it's fun to just try and be selective for drakes, but, does it matter from a population standpoint? No. I always just say the picture looks nicer, and that's the primary reason that I do it. It's fun to play a game where you're trying to sort birds and, shoot a certain kind. Some days I'll do that with just a species. It's like, oh, it'd be cool to just shoot widgeon. But, if you harvested 2 hens, does the science tell us that's going to drive populations down? Probably not.
Well, I think, like, wherever that came from, the two mallard thing, because like we don't have it for any of these other species that have way lower populations, like widgeon, right?
Yeah.
There's way less widgeon out there than there are mallards, but for some reason we only have two. Like mallards are this magical thing that get all effed up by shooting hens,
right?
And that ain't true. So yeah, you challenge yourself early in the season to only shoot drake widgeon. Good luck picking them out, right?
Well, and I like to play some of those games early, on Canadian areas. It's like with pintails, because it's like, it's way more challenging trying to sort pintails in September, right?
Oh heck yeah,
so,
we run into that.
But it's fun too.
Yeah. Good stuff, Scott. We're gonna change gears here and do something fun. This has been a great chat, but
okay,
you're the guinea pig on this new game we're doing. So we're doing something called Duck Duel with all our guests during the off season.
It is months until planting season, but your vision is already clear. The land is your passion, and Hancock Seed has your back. You plan food plots to feed and attract game in ways that matter for months. Live on your land with Hancock Seed. Today you plan, tomorrow you harvest. With Hancock Seed, you get family farm faith, nearly a century in the making. Hancock Seed has partnered with Foul Weather to produce 3 distinct seed blends. The Northern Deer Food Plot Mix, a proven combination that keeps deer coming all year round. The Southern Waterfowl Mix for carbohydrate-driven ducks. And the Northern Waterfowl Mix, built to succeed even in the toughest summers. Hancock Seed specializes from turf to plow and beyond. Find them today at hancockseed.com. That's hancockseed.com.
This is fun. Duck Duel, the official betting platform of the Foul Weather podcast. No, there's no, you're not going to win anything. Maybe pride at the end, but here's how it works.
Bragging rights.
That's what we're going with. We're going to create, we might do, I have no idea what our business plan is, but we're looking at doing some swag, and maybe the biologist or whoever scientist that wins this thing will get, a t-shirt or something like that. But so here's how it works.
There you go.
We're just doing the over under. So if people are familiar with betting, right, it's just the over under. So I'll give you a question with a number. So maybe it's some harvest number, sex ratio, a BPOP estimate. And you have to tell me if you think the number this coming year is going to come in over or under the number we provided. That's all it is. So it's a yes, no. And I actually have to keep track.
So like for harvest, that's like the 25-26 season then.
So it's it's the data that's going to come out for 25-26. Yep.
Yeah,
and then
gotcha.
For BPOP, same thing. So I think it's all harvest, and it's all, there's a May Ponds question, but it's all harvest or what comes out in the waterfall status report. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Ready.
So here's the questions. Arkansas mallard harvest for 25-26. The over under is 500,000.
So that's probably what it was last year. I'm going to take under.
Okay. I think I agree with that one. I really do, having been down there and not seen a lot of them this year. Number 2, total duck population in the traditional survey area for this year, 2026, 32 million. So I think 32 million was what it was last year.
I think it was a little higher than that. So I'm going to, total ducks. I wrote down, I did look at some of that stuff. It was basically 33.98. So I'll take over on 32.
Woohoo. I like the sound of that. That makes me feel good.
Yeah. Now I'm not sure it's going to be 35 or 36.
Right. Like, 32.2 million or something maybe, but an area you're not super familiar with, the mallard population in the Eastern Survey area. And now this is like a composite modeled abundance. So it's mallard population in the Eastern Survey area, estimated abundance 1 million.
Okay. Yeah, this one's kind of a crapshoot for me. I'll go over.
I think you might be right. I think it was 1.2 last year. So
okay.
Louisiana total duck, and here's what I want our listeners to do too: is listen to these numbers and how starkly different some of them are going to be as well. Right? Louisiana total duck harvest for 25-26, 1.3 million. Louisiana. Now,
Yeah, that's a
and consider the cold we had too. So
yeah, that's a big number, and I know Louisiana is always a big harvest state. Let's go over.
yeah, I already typed it for you. I
Okay,
knew you were. I knew that's where you were going. Here's one because those folks in Louisiana have seen a strong decline in their mallard harvest. So
sure.
Louisiana total mallard harvest for 25-26, 70,000, which is what it was last year.
Okay, I'll take under there
Ooh,
because I
okay.
believe that it's like warm conditions and changes in temperature that we see all across places like you and I live. It's like, yeah, probably fewer are getting there. No, I don't think that's in dispute.
Well, yeah, over time for sure. I did
Yeah.
see some telemetry stuff that showed birds really pushed down in there a little bit on that snow. Not all of them, a lot of them stuck,
Right.
but some of them did push in. So my take on that one is over. I think Louisiana shot more mallards. There's going to be guys who be like, I didn't see a mallard this year,
Right.
but it's fine.
Yeah.
This is an interesting one, and there's a little backstory to this. Immature versus adult mallard age ratios in the 25-26 harvest for South Carolina. So this comes from the Parts Collection Survey,
Okay.
and they can get adult versus immature birds. So the age ratio, immatures to adults in 25-26 harvest for South Carolina, and the over-under is 2 immatures per adult.
Okay. Yeah, and South Carolina is interesting. I know historically they got some birds from the prairies, maybe not as much of that anymore. So you're thinking maybe more eastern mallards. Yeah. If it was prairies, I would take the under. This is tough. I'll take the under, I think.
Okay.
That ratio will decline. Fewer young this year.
So oddly, and I've looked into this, it's crazy when you put it up against all the other Atlantic flyway states. That number has been as high as 5 immatures per adult
Oh, wow.
in the Parts Collection Survey. You know where that's coming from?
Where?
You know when you release mallards, they're all immatures.
Oh, yeah.
It's
So it's
gain-
released birds?
It's released birds, I think,
Yeah,
because their
okay.
numbers are astronomical. Because your immatures per adult decline as you go down the flyway,
Right.
because there's no
Yeah.
dumb ducks left by
Right.
the time they get farther south. But all of a sudden, South Carolina goes through the roof. So,
Yeah, that's
fun
interesting.
stuff. Yeah, fun stuff. California mallard harvest for 25-26, 150,000.
Yeah, I know a little bit from talking to our folks out west about mallards out there. They've been on decline sort of long term. So I'm going to take an under. Like, yeah, that's a guess.
I would too, given the I think just how warm it was as well, right? Like
Yeah.
Alaska, British Columbia got cold kind of early, and then stuff just hung up in like Oregon, Washington, kind of the Intermountain region.
Right.
California, I think, had a pretty dismal year in general. I mean, I know they produce their own,
Well,
but they
and-
also
and-
get migrants in as well. So
Yeah. Well, and then I know they got super wet, right? So like birds were probably scattered everywhere.
Spreads
so
everybody
lots of
out.
water can be challenging to.
did I lock up? Did you lock up?
I'm okay. You look okay to me.
Okay.
So
We're good.
there was maybe just a flicker there, but
Yeah, we're
yeah,
fine.
I
We're fine.
think
All
we're
right.
good.
The habitat stuff. May ponds in the prairie in Parkland, Canada. This is what gets reported in, I think it's AHM. I can't remember. Maybe it's in the waterfall status report. So it's it's that core prairie, Parkland, Canada.
It's in the
and
status report.
North Central U.S. So 4 million ponds is what I'm going with for the over/under.
I'm going to take over, just because we've got a little snow. I think maybe it'll improve mostly in Canada a little bit. So yeah, I'll take over.
I love the optimism. I would do it even if I thought it was going to be under. I would just say over to make myself feel better, I think.
Yeah, some of my colleagues will be surprised by that because usually I'm the consummate pessimist. So
Okay.
but yeah, I'll take over 4 million on ponds. So
All right, we are on number 9, so we're almost there. Atlantic flyway total duck harvest. Now remember, Louisiana total duck harvest, I had the
1.3?
over-under is 1.3 million. Atlantic flyway total duck harvest, 300,000 for the whole
wow.
flyway. The whole flyway.
yeah, 300,000. So over under on that, huh? I'll take under. And this is one I'm not very informed on either. So that's a bit of a guess.
I would say it's a guess even for me a little bit. I think I went with like that was right around maybe last year's was like 320,000, 310,
Okay.
something like that. I don't know. We'll see. It depends on the species. Like we got a bunch of diving ducks this year in weird places we didn't have them before. Like you could go shoot your 2 bluebills up on the
nice.
St. Lawrence River like any day, but it was like 2 for 30 days, right? So that doesn't add a lot to the total duck harvest.
That's right. Yeah.
I guess North Carolina, when it got cold, did really well. So we will see. All right. Number 10, the difference in score in the Bills-Chiefs game in 2026. I'm going plus 20 Bills. No, I'm just...
Yeah, well, this is hard for me. I don't. It's like Chiefs didn't have a very good team this year, and I don't know what it's going to look like. I
don't know what the Bills are going to look like, Scott. I mean, it's rough. So.
Yeah. I would. Games are typically close. I would say they have been. So I would probably. I'll take Bills plus 7. How's that? And then I'll be happy either way. If either I win the bet or my team wins the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think plus 20 Bills is like way too much in that. I just noticed, I bet you I've got a glitch in here because I said the real number 10 is Mississippi Flyway total duck harvest of 1.7 million.
Okay.
But it has to be more than that because Louisiana's alone was 1.3.
Well, but Louisiana's central, right?
No, they're Mississippi.
Are they?
Yeah. So we're going to have to scratch that one. You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to email you to fill that one in because I think I made an error in my typing overall.
Okay.
Yeah, so we are not the official platform of the Foul Weather Podcast because we are in error completely. But so that was fun. I think it's just something, a new twist. It gives us a chance to actually talk about why those numbers are maybe, what they're going to be. So we'll interview other folks. I will get this correct one in here, email it to you so that you're in the running with everybody else this year that we interview.
Sounds good.
We'll see how you stack up against the rest of the field for the rest of the year. So good luck with that, Scott. I know you're just hanging up by a thread on it. Like that's the most important thing for you this year.
No, those things are fun to think about. Yeah.
And well, hey man, this was good. I've always enjoyed working with you as a colleague and chatting with you about these things and really, just a pleasure having you with us, Scott.
Yeah, happy to join. And always good to talk about ducks. Maybe the only thing I would say as we finish up is, I'd say right now I am convinced that everybody who cares about ducks, like we all need to pull together and be pulling on the rope to help do things that will allow us to keep sustainable populations over the long term. So, infighting isn't productive because, we've got big battles and we need everybody on the team pulling in the right direction. So that's my 2 cents.
Amen. We'll just go with that. That's pretty simple. So thank you so much, Scott. Folks, we're going to start running a habitat series for a few weeks. Kind of seems like the time to start planning for the growing season. So please stick with us through the entire, I put quotes around off season because man, it's not for me. I actually have a meeting with Hancock Seed, which we have a relationship with now for some seed mixes that have the Foul Weather logo on them and are endorsed by us. I have that right now. And then on to the U.S.-Canada hockey game, women's hockey gold game. So, all right, folks, thanks for listening. And as always, may your skies be filled and shoot straight, my friends.